Sometimes we joke that when my partner and I bought the company, 17 years ago now, we would say, as we were raising money to do the acquisition, we joke that we bought a company in an industry that's been in decline for 350 years. Ever since that whole light bulb thing, candles have really suffered.
Welcome to UnNatural Selection, a show about competition, innovation, and the strategies shaping tomorrow's frontiers. I'm Nick Encina. Each week, we speak with pioneers shaping the future.
In today's episode of UnNatural Selection, we turn to one of humanity's oldest industries. Long before electricity, candles lit homes, places of worship, and city streets. For centuries, they were essential infrastructure for daily life. Then, almost overnight in historical terms, artificial lighting threatened to make them obsolete. And yet, candles didn't disappear. Instead, the industry reinvented itself again and again, shifting from necessity to craftsmanship, from utility to experience, from light source to lifestyle. Because let's be honest, who doesn't love a beautifully scented candle glowing beside a fireplace? This is episode 52. Rod is chairman of Alene Candles, a company he and an investor group acquired in 2008. Through 2023, Rod held the position of president and CEO, a period during which the company grew tenfold, expanding product capabilities and adding 2 greenfield manufacturing sites. Rod is a member of Young Presidents Organization, YPO, where he served 3 years as chapter chair across 2 chapters, including co-founding a new chapter based on the concept of conscious living. Rod holds dual Bachelor's of Science degrees in chemistry and chemical engineering, highest honors from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Let's go.
Rod, welcome to UnNatural Selection.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to hear about this as well. When we were introduced, I was really curious because this is an industry that's been around for thousands of years, right? If we chase it all the way back to the original lineage, right past, like campfires, it was the original source of light, giving us a way of navigating the, society at nighttime, all the way through like being able to read when the sun is down. And it's gone through tremendous metamorphosis over millennia. Right? I mean, usually I interview people and it's like, oh, your company's been around for 50 years. That's amazing. Here we're talking about an industry that's been around since like the beginning of civilization. And so I would just love to, and not that you can speak to all the strategic decisions made 1,000 years ago, but I think it'd be really interesting to just learn more about the industry, especially as it's more from kind of like the sole source of light to now more of a home goods and fragrance kind of industry. And then really from there, try to unpack like what innovation looks like in your industry and what competition looks like. But before we jump into all of that, I really like to start with a signature question that gives you, the guest, the opportunity to share with us what motivates you. So with that, Rod, could you please let us know what need or impact drives your work?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And it's an interesting question. For me, if I were to say, taking a broader view, even outside of candles, it's and this goes back to my parents. To whom much is given, much is expected, right? And that's driven my approach to life, and the fact that I think many of us live very favored lives, but not everyone does. And part of the responsibility that we have, and frankly, even sitting here on this podcast right now, is that we need to. It's our responsibility to have an impact on the world, and some of the things that we've done here with the through the vehicle of a candle business, I think support that.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of us that aren't very familiar with the industry itself, or how candles are made, can you give us a quick overview of what Alene Candles does and how the broader candle and fragrance industry actually works?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, sometimes we joke that, in fact, when I partner and I bought the company, 17 years ago now, we would say, as we were raising money to do the acquisition, we joke that we bought a company in an industry that's been in decline for 350 years. Yeah. Ever since that whole light bulb thing, candles have really suffered.
Yeah, the
Uh,
major disruption.
it, it happens in every industry. Um, So how the industry works now, we're actually a contract manufacturer for other brands. So companies will approach us and say, I want to make my brand or instantiate my brand into a candle product or other home fragrance product that we can also help them with. They will often work with a separate company that makes the fragrance. And there are some very large multinational companies, some in the United States, some overseas, that really understand trends and the chemistry, the technical formulation, and help. And I'd say the romance around fragrance. They'll work with the fragrance houses to come up with a palette of what they want to offer. We then take the ball and turn that fragrance into a product that burns and burns safely. I tell our employees, or something the gentleman we bought the company from used to say is, you know, we may make tens of millions of candles a year, but every one of those is intended to be set on fire in someone's house, right? So you can't say, well, 99.9% of our candles are safe, but we won't worry about that last little bit. Every one of those is going to end up in a house that, you know, feels like us, looks like us, and we want that to be safe. So a big part of the work we've done since owning the company has been to really focus on safety and consistency of product. And indeed, we're still at a scale of tens of millions of candles a year, and I can say with confidence, even as we've grown, that we're making today the safest product that we've ever been. And I think some things we've done have rubbed off on others in the industry, which I think is good for all of us.
Yeah. Um, I've got 2 questions in my mind. I don't know which one to go to first, but, I'll actually segue straight from this one because you're talking about this right now, but afterwards, I wanna go back to how you got into this industry
Oh, sure.
because, you have a technical, you have a business background, and I'm like, "Wait, how'd you end up in candles?" But before we get there, you're talking about, like, the evolution of the company. You're making millions of candles a year, and then you've spearheaded a lot of the work on safety, right? And probably production at scale. So, in an industry that's been around for thousands of years, and maybe in the modern form, 350 years, or longer since that you referenced, what does innovation, how do you define innovation in this industry that's been around for so long? Like, what does it mean? And I know there are many factors. There's from products and production to marketing and partnerships and so on. But, you know, where you stand, what's the definition of innovation when it comes to candle making?
Yeah, absolutely. I touch on a couple areas. Certainly, when people think of innovation, your mind's often drawn to product and technical aspects. So uh, our approach has been and coupling that with the safety concern. We were, our own story is we ended up being very fortunate to work with some brands that were growing quite quickly over a number of years. And in doing that, we were taxing the supply chain for all the raw materials. So you'll see, you know, different ingredient profiles hinted at in the stores. You'll see this is a soy candle, this is a paraffin candle. Maybe there are synthetic blends. There's certainly innovation in that formulation, what goes into the chemistry that then gets mixed with the fragrance and put with a wick and burned at home. We've done in that scaling process, we've done a lot of work to really understand what causes a candle to burn, say well or burn not, right? So many people have had the experience where they burn a candle at home and it may generate soot, right? It may be, or you blow it out and it generates smoke afterwards. We can actually control some of that behavior between the chemistry of the formulation and the wick itself, right? Making sure you've got a wick that's matched correctly. We we're running into cases in the early teens where, uh, magnified with a particular customer, we found that candles we would design in the first half of the year, and I should predicate this by saying most candles are sold in the second half of the year, where it's fall and holiday. Really, 40% of candles are sold in fourth quarter. So for holiday, it's a giftable item. You just plus you don't really you can imagine middle of the summer, you're not really excited to be burning candles at home.
Mhm.
Uh, so what so our calendar though is opposite that. So we'll actually work very very hard in April May timeframe, March April May timeframe, to develop the candles that are going to be sold for holiday. And that lets the fragrance house get raw materials at scale and so forth. But we want to make sure that we're ready for that. So when we get fragrance samples in April, the fragrance house may have sourced materials from all over the world that could be seasonal. So, a fragrance that contains 30 to 50 components or so, as well as diluents behind it. Those 30 to 50 components, the vanilla bean in April may have been harvested in India. But by the time September, October roll around, that vanilla bean, for seasonal reasons, may have been found under a rock in Madagascar,
Mm.
right? And may have a different supply chain and may have been shipped in a plastic container versus a metal container. So what we were discovering in the early teens was um, for some fragrances, we would create a candle that burned perfectly in April based on that profile. But by the time we got to the production fragrance, if you will, in volume in September, that chemistry had changed. And either the flame height that was a nice 3/4 of an inch in the springtime, uh, uh, it wasn't performing like that. The candle may actually go out, right? Or burn very low and just have a little nub of a flame, or we might find the opposite that actually burned high, which you don't want either because you start to run into safety issues. So this was causing a real problem for us and for our brand partners. But I sat down with our head of R&D and I said to him, uh, I said, Tom, what do we need to do of all the chemistry we know about on the planet? What do we need to do to fix this? Are there analytical tools we can bring in? And so we identified a fairly inexpensive spectrophotometry approach to screen simply the raw materials, right? More carefully than had gone in. We've been using a different tool that only measured organics before. We started to see a little different view, and that enabled us to um, postulate what was going on chemically, and we could start to control it. And we went to the suppliers and said, "Hey, this is what we're finding. Can you narrow your production specs?" And indeed, they said, "Oh, sure." Well, maybe it wasn't quite so agreeable, but their specs were this wide. Maybe they were. I'm holding my hands some distance apart, and they said, "Sure, we almost always produce down here in this range. We just have a wider spec." So we said, great, we're going to normalize to your tighter ranges. And ultimately they agreed. And I feel like here years later, with some of the additional knowledge that we shared upstream in the supply chain, that the fragrance houses are producing, I'll say, cleaner for candles, right? So the chemistry was fine before as a fragrance. But if you're going to burn something, the chemistry changes in that combustion environment. And I think we're seeing better products everywhere, not just in our own portfolio.
Wow, that's fascinating. And my background is healthcare, life sciences, biotech. And as you're talking here, I'm picturing like chemistry labs. It sounds like a lot of what you did initially was really standardizing and optimizing like logistics and operations, QA, QC. But then I also now, and my questions come from a genuine place of just intellectual curiosity, but also just naivete, right? When I think about candle making, I never thought biotech, with like labs full of chemists and other scientists really trying to tweak every single performance of the product. But it makes total sense because you mentioned there like soot, you mentioned smoke, and these are things that I take for granted, or I think kind of when I'm using it. For example, when I turn on a candle at home, I always make sure it's nowhere near like a wall or a ceiling because I don't want to see like the black soot kind of like build on it. But now I know like you guys are already planning for that. Like let's minimize that so we don't have soot, building. And interestingly with smoke, personally, I like a little bit of smoke because when I shut off the candle, there's like that nostalgia, which is like now you smell a little bit of like the campfire, the
Sure.
smoke. So like I would never want the smoke to go away, but also you don't want to like the alarms to start going
Yeah,
off in your house, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny you say about, scientists and chemists and so forth. Uh, when I give tours or people give tours to, even to potential customers, it does feel like you're walking through, uh, a biotech lab, right? With people on machines and benches and, doing frankly, excellent work. But I think that's truly important, right? It's obviously not just for look, but we feel we're among the most have been and maintain the highest level of investment from a technical standpoint. And I think that's been a fantastic resource. People do come to us with problems with candles that we didn't necessarily make, and we're able to help diagnose that because at the end of the day, this is a safety issue. It's an industry issue, and I want people to have that confidence. But, indeed, as you said, soot and other dimensions, we do our best to, and actually provide assurance around the temperature of the outside of the candle. So if you have a candle and it's, hot on the outside, right, because 'cause it's got fire inside,
Mm.
we we monitor during our testing that temperature of the surface so that, and we know about the limits depending on the material of construction of that container. uh, how hot can it get? So your nerves will allow you to let go of it, um, and not sustain damage. It'll hurt, but you're not going to have a singed fingertip. Um, so there's a lot that goes into the testing that we do and making sure again we're putting our name behind the product, but it's not on the product, and that's part of the service that we offer to our brand customers.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And as we said in the beginning, right, this industry candle started as a survival technology for light, timekeeping, and so on back in the day. And today it's much more about mood, wellness, even identity, right? I mean, it's like there's there's no shortage of surfaces at my house that have candles, whether they're on or not. Like they just became part of the identity. It's like people that's how they decorate their homes, and so the industry's gone through tremendous transformation. And even when you walk in, like if I walk into like a TJ Maxx and I go to the candle section, the sizes and shapes and colors and scents, it's extraordinary, just the diversity in
Mhm.
this field, right? Um, so it's was essentially it's changed to from utility to emotion. Does that also affect how you design products and factories to cope with like the evolving nature of the product itself?
Well, at the end of the day, if we make a candle and it doesn't sell, then that's it doesn't matter how great a quality is if it sits on the shelf.
Yeah.
So certainly, candles need to be on trend, and as we say as a manufacturer, on trend on time. We were talking about innovation. So another dimension to support that we've targeted over the years, not just supply quality upstream in the supply chain, but really alignment with our supply chain partners to drive speed. So imagine if in a traditional supply chain, you're making decisions 90 to 120 days in advance of having a candle on a shelf. If you're needing to that here in we're speaking in if it's February 2026. If you had to decide what candle I'm going to have being sold for Thanksgiving, if I had to decide today, right, or even what's going to be in the back to school in the back to school market, it's gonna be tough, right? We don't know what trends, we don't know what the consumer is, and frankly, you're gonna get to that day anyway. You may not know until candles are on the shelf.
Mhm.
So what we've been able to do, with certain supply chains is to really align. So we can get a buy order and in about 3 weeks have product, shipping out to our customers. And that's taken years of alignment between, each of the players along the stream. Plus it requires some trust, that if we block manufacturing space, right? Because we don't like to have factory that's not running. So, and if a brand then says, okay, I put test product out into stores, um, I know that the green one's selling better than the red one, or the pumpkin spice is selling better than the evergreen, with whatever label combination I have. Now we can start to say, let's order for the next round. Let's order 4 times as much of the pumpkin spice. And then we're able to come back and say, okay, for 3 weeks, I can have that behind you. The consumer doesn't see any drop off in volume, but the distortion of supply enables that brand to be much, much more successful against their business objectives.
That's interesting. One of the premise behind this podcast really started from just a personal curiosity about how other industries innovate, drastically different from mine, life sciences and healthcare. I was just curious about areas that I knew nothing about and how they innovate. And then are there like learnings from each one that map into other ones? And as you're talking, the reason why I bring this up is as you're talking, it draws my mind. I interviewed last year an top executive from Reebok,
Mhm,
and I'm like seeing parallels because you mentioned there, like, you designing a candle today for Thanksgiving, like, market trends change. You can't necessarily foretell like what kind of candle will be selling during
mhm,
Thanksgiving. And similar there, the way that they've had to operationalize things, like you don't know what kind of sneaker people are going to be wearing in January of 2027. So
mhm,
you've got to keep production going, but keep them flexible enough so you can respond to market shifts.
mhm.
And so I see some trends between what you're doing and maybe even some learnings the other way, right? Because what sneakers have done is also make it so that you could personalize and make your own sneakers online. Like,
Mhm.
couple buttons here, and it's like, oh, I designed my own personal unique sneaker. Is there a similar kind of a shift in candles to saying like, oh, I want to create my own scent?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think there are technologies that are getting in that direction, where you can, there are devices being marketed now where you can say, "I'm in the mood for X tonight." Right now, the nature of the chemistry is pretty complicated. As I said, the fragrances in which we deal may have 30 to 50 components. I'm sure if our R&D people here, they'd kick me under the table and say, "No, it's really closer to 80." But the more sophisticated fragrances generally have more components and more complexity to it. So today you can create a fragrance experience with a fairly limited palette, I would say, and often they're finished fragrances, but some things turn on and off. You may overlay two fragrances, or let's say layer two fragrances together, and that lets you have a level of customization. Something unique about a candle is every and this gets back to safety testing, right? Because candles do burn, so are intended to burn. So we for every combination of container, so container size and material, every combination of container, the formulation, the fragrance, and we also in our business we take into account color. Every combination of those 4 things gets tested for its own wick, right? And we do certificate testing to have confidence that if that goes to market, then we're presenting a safe product to the consumer. If the consumer were to start you know, doing their own chemistry and changing that fragrance, it does change the burn characteristic,
Hmm.
and it throws for a candle product. It they if they add too much cinnamon oil, for example, that happens to burn hot, and so that can lead to some other issues. So
So you'd have to constrain the different chemicals. You can only use so much of this, and even in combination, probably starts getting really wacky too, right?
mhm. Yeah, we actually worked on a project years ago where the consumer had the option of buying, envision a long, skinny, kind of a tube, and they could buy little discs. So envision small hockey pucks,
Hmm.
right, with holes in them, and they can stack them up and make a unique color combination. As they burn, they get different fragrances as that went down. Super challenging from a safety standpoint because we wanted to pick a wick that could work with all of these,
Oh yeah.
different combinations. And the product ended up not going to market, but it was a fantastic challenge for us, and it really put our people to the test and caused us to learn some things about safety in that process.
Yeah. Um, and then So what do you see any trends right now with all these different things kind of changing technology and so on, fragrances and where is the industry kind of going to right now? Like from your perspective, what direction or what evolution do you see for the industry?
Well, I do we do see other home fragrance products coming to market, plug-in diffusers. So, you take a bulb and screw it up into usually a plastic chassis, and that plugs in. There are products where you can draw from two different vials. There are a few companies that do this, two different vials, and it can create a mixture of fragrance.
Oh,
That's interesting. We also see an evolution in we call continuous action or flameless. So reed diffusers, as guys, we think of them as things you see in a bathroom at a restaurant. So sticks in a jar.
oh yeah.
But all of these are just a way to bring fragrance to different spaces. We've had some interest in working with brands, one of our brand partners on, small space. So, you can get a car air freshener. Of course, you can get the tree that you get at the car wash.
Yeah. That thing's been around for like 40 years.
Been around a long time. But there are other ways to bring fragrance into different environments, and they all and, you can envision you need different rates of throw. We'd say, expelling fragrance from a device, because if you're in a car and you have a powerful candle amount of fragrance coming in, you're going to be falling out of your car, gasping at some point, because it's just a very intense. But it would just be very intense. But I think I focus a lot of our conversation on safety, but really bringing delight to the consumer
Mhm.
is what this is all about. Our role happens to be a little more utilitarian, and I've got a candle burning on my desk now. Um, Seeing that product with a consistent burn performance, consuming the wax, right? Not a lot of hold up on the sides, and then of course that it puts itself out before it gets all the way to the bottom. So every one of those surfaces in your house doesn't get damaged. Those are all things that are somewhat table stakes and just need to be present no matter what fragrance you're using.
I'm laughing because I've been yelled at by my wife because I tend to be the paranoid one about safety. You know, like safety first. That's just me. I'm dad. That's my mantra. And when I see candles and I don't see a person in the room, I'm like, "What are you doing? Like, there's an open flame in a room. Where are you? Oh, I'm downstairs." It's like, well, that shouldn't happen. And then I get yelled at because it's like, well, they designed them now so that they don't like burn straight through your furniture. And I
Sure,
guess I'm old
sure.
school, right? I think about
Well,
a
no,
candle.
you are a responsible candle owner. So, and I would be completely remiss if I didn't say, in all cases, never leave a burning candle unattended.
Yeah.
Always, as you say, burn it in a safe place. And something that's not emphasized nearly often enough, but I think is one of the most significant factors in candle quality is make sure that you trim your wick. And before you light it, in fact, it doesn't need to be complicated. Take a tissue and reach in on that unlit candle and take tissue, pinch off the top. And it always leaves about a quarter inch, which is the target. And that's what we do our testing to, right? Make sure that's there, and that there's no, as a scientist, you'll appreciate this. It's a consistent starting point, and there's no extra debris in the candle. You don't want to give any other flame source in there, or have a wick with a bunch of debris on top of it.
That makes total sense. So, I mean, if we're talking about safety before we move on, a couple things. Number one is I know that over time, the fragrance is one of the things that you guys have been focusing on a lot for safety. You mentioned those pine hangers from the cars, right? I can't help but think about how the toxins in that because those things were manufactured and created like 50 years ago. Everybody had them, but who knows what chemicals were in them, right?
Mhm.
And as the industry has evolved, a lot of attention has been on the fragrances coming out of candles and the safety around that. And you've talked a lot about safety, so presumably you guys are doing a lot of the work in that. So can you comment on that? And also with respect to imports from international places, right? So there's one thing for you guys to set standards on your safety, but then what does that mean with respect to competition when you're competing with potentially cheaper products come from who knows where, but also under very different like safety standards?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Because indeed, we're for the most part we are a global business environment. Um, I'd preface this by saying, there are good products and product makers everywhere in the world. We have had cases in the United States where we know some brands and retailers that have had recall experiences, which obviously you don't want to have for any reason, business wise, or certainly not safety. And in some cases, those have been overseas. We do um, practice transparency with our customers. So we want to be a trusted business partner in all respects. And part of that is making sure that they know the testing we're doing, knowing where, what is important, what needs to be done. So, for example, if you have a glass container, when this glass is manufactured, the expectation is that they do some heat annealing, right? So that this is, if a flame gets up close to it or it gets hot, it's less likely to break from a thermal shock, right? Obviously, if you take a hot candle, you plunge it in an ice bath, you're at risk, but of that breaking. But uh, so some of that testing can be done. It has to be done upstream. Uh, if you're buying that from a glass manufacturer that isn't reputable or hasn't done that testing or can't provide certificate of having done that, then you're at risk.
Mhm.
And we will counsel. Often our customers will buy that glass. If we buy the glass, we absolutely are on top of that and require that. But, like anything, I think being a smart consumer, and knowing a little bit about the provenance of what you're buying, whether it's food or makeup or skincare or a candle, um, the industry does a good job of policing itself. But if you see a product that is has looks questionable or looks low quality, or if you're burning it yourself and some we've seen pictures of candles where the consumers throwing their match into it afterwards, and it leaves that there. That's poor practice. So
Mhm.
just as I'd heard a comparison once, frying if you're a consumer using a frying pan, the expectation is the frying pan gets hot. You need to treat it like it's hot. A candle does have open flame, and you need to treat it as if it has open flame.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still fire. Um, and so, obviously, you employ tons of scientists and engineers, as we've spoken about here. Um, and from the outside, it seems like something that's very straightforward and simple, but obviously there's a lot of complexity. In my world, it's the same way, right? We talk about genomic newborn screening. It's like, oh, we should just do it. But when you unpack the details about what it takes to actually do it, it's like very complex, very challenging questions that are still unanswered. So, from your perspective, what's a candle problem that seems trivial to consumers, but is technically complex at scale?
Hmm. Excellent. Well, I'd probably go back to it's technically difficulty at scale. Well, I hesitate to use the same story twice, but I'm going to draw on the consistency of product across fragrances. So the consumer will go and she'll smell a pine fragrance, or she'll smell maybe it's a mint fragrance, um, and that will burn very differently than a clove heavy fragrance. And she doesn't really know. She just wants a candle that performs. But the idea of a really deep clovey fragrance, boy, those burn hot. There's the chemicals that make that your nose sense that as clove or cinnamon. Those are really hot to perform. Hot performance once it gets into the environment of a flame. So there are at times, many brands, sizable brands will have a couple candle fillers that work for them just for supply chain reasons. And there are times where we'll find out that we're being shipped a fragrance that another supplier couldn't make work, or couldn't get to work. And it's a feather in our cap. I also know, it's good for business, but it's also an absolutely a technical challenge. Um, so our goal is that the consumer has no awareness of what happens upstream,
Yeah.
but invariably we'll bring people through our factory and our labs, and they say, "Wow, to a person, I had no idea that this much was involved in making a candle."
I mean, it sounds like it, right? I mean, as you're talking, and even in the very beginning of the interview, you talked about getting raw materials from, from India and other places around the world. So I would imagine even like geopolitics plays a role into your business, right? You're a major manufacturer. You're getting products. You have supply chains coming from all over the world, and so any geopolitical shifts or tariffs or any of these different macroeconomic kind of factors probably, like, throw you for a loop pretty pretty often, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have an excellent supply chain group that monitors that, and I'm glad I'm not one of them, because indeed the world changes frequently, and sometimes it's in hours. At least it is now. Um, we, there are products you just can't buy in the United States. Hand blown glass, faceted glass. You have to go to a region where that skill is, because those skills are no longer, the craftsmanship is no longer here. Um, but there are also less temporal factors. So, um, a macro trend is sustainability, right? And so we see that. We talked about innovation. We have some brand partners who are interested in creating a recyclable candle. And so it's not that the container is recyclable per se, but that you can actually buy a refill. I should probably put it that way. So you consume one candle all the way out. There's a means to remove the, whatever residue, and you pop. Easy to say, but you pop another billet of candle material in. That's a fantastic innovation. It lets you save the glass. It may be a beautiful piece of glass, and reuse that. A number of years ago, concerns were raised about how palm oil was being sourced in regions where that's grown. So palm oil comes from palm trees, from the palm tree groves, grown in equatorial regions. Well, there are places on the planet where the oversight years ago was not fantastic for that, and the equivalent of, you and I are about the same age, but if you remember talking about deforestation, right? The chopping down the rainforest was
Mhm.
big, when we were young. Um, not to say, I'm not an expert on what was actually happening, but that raises a concern, and so palm oil gets a bad name, and people don't want to consume it. Well, there are now very responsible supply chains and growers of palm, or suppliers of palm, and we can see that certification come through. And frankly, the sanitizing agent in enabling that supply chain to become much cleaner has been, transparency. So I can think of one supplier that actually has a website that does reports and audits on the
Mm.
on the growers, and you can see the amount coming from each one, and when the last audit was, and are they being sustainable, both on from a natural resources standpoint, but also a human standpoint. Which I think, and I might share with you some thoughts on this as well. As a manufacturer, whether you're producing palm oil in Indonesia or Malaysia, or you are a manufacturer in the United States, taking care of the people along the way is, and making sure it's a sustainable, cooperative relationship for both you and them. I think, you talk about trends. That's certainly a trend in manufacturing. Is something that we've embraced for frankly, a number of years, probably before it was popular, to really take care of your people. I think that's incredibly important as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And actually, as you talk about people, in my career, obviously, and speaking generally for everybody, companies and the products that create and the innovation that you do, all of it stems from the at the core teams and people and culture. And I'm curious, like what's the culture like? I mean, as we've talked about this, I can't help, again, from a very naive perspective, I think you're somewhere in between, and I can't say which end. Either like at the far end of like a very formalized and rigid like biochemistry environment, like a pharmaceutical company, but all the way to the other extreme of potentially like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. People that just love their product, they're passionate
Mhm.
about it, they know everything about it down to the chemistry, but it's like something that they live for the chocolate, right? And I'm
Mhm.
like, man, where do you guys live? Because you're very hardcore in the science, but this is also a very emotional field. And so what's your culture look like? What kind of a culture do you try to build into your organization?
Oh, fantastic. I love that. And I love the the Willy Wonka comparison, which I appreciate more than the Lucy and the Chocolate Factory. But so from as a manufacturer, right? You need to be fairly right angled when it comes to quality, not just safety and R&D, but all the way through through the manufacturing process, right? And that is uncompromising. Not just for the product that you make, but also, frankly, to be competitive in the United States. You can't have sloppy operations, right? You got to be pretty disciplined. Um, we're a small business, and you talk to some I mean, you have fantastic guests, and absolutely applaud you for that. And it wouldn't surprise me that we're the smallest business that you've talked with or may ever talk with. Um, and there are things we do so that our employees, with great intentionalities, so our employees feel like we're a small business. But on the theme of innovation, we did something a number of years ago that had not been done in manufacturing, and that's bring mindfulness techniques, and we would use a term called conscious leadership, that a friend of mine in California helped create. She did a great deal of writing on, and then brought a number of principles forward. But we were amongst the first. I think we were probably the first to bring these mindfulness principles to the factory floor, and by that I mean enabling us to uh, have a common dialogue, common language amongst amongst office internally. So, for example, one of our principles is teaching radical responsibility, or said another way, people need to show up. And as long as we have, whether you're an hourly worker on the floor, or you're a middle manager, or you're somebody on the executive side, uh, how you portray and the values you create, you show every day are based on how you show up.
Mhm,
So if I show up and I'm like, "Oh, it's not my fault," or I'm grousing or whatever, that doesn't start with us. That doesn't work. You can come in and say, "I'm having a bad day. I'm coming in a bad place today. I need some support." Okay, great. We can work with that. We also teach people how to speak with candor, but in a heart forward way, so they can speak their truth, right? I'm observing this. That's speaking inarguably.
mhm,
Not saying you're doing the wrong thing, or you said this and what. No, that's not, that's may or may not be true, but you can say, I observed you saying this, or I believe something else. And when you teach people on the floor to have some of these commonality of languages commonalities in their choice of language, um, that maybe people like you and I, we pick this up, in other circles, but for somebody who's making $25 an hour, that may be new. And as we found as we started teaching people this goes all the way back to 2016, when we had some significant cultural challenges, especially in our New Hampshire plant. We had some bad hires, and people, if we had a manager weaponizing people's jobs and threatening, so forth. So we parted ways with that individual as we figured out what was going on, but we needed some radical medicine.
mhm,
Um, and that radical medicine was getting people into this in this format. But what we've discovered is, as we taught people how to pause, how to slow down their mind so they may feel triggered, but they can take a breath and wait for their frontal lobe to catch up.
Mhm.
And we give techniques for even, as I said, even our hourly people to understand what's going on. We find the temperature in the factory lowers, and that people are able to solve problems more readily.
Figuratively speaking, right?
Yeah, yeah. It- yeah, that was excellent. Gate candle humor always gets me. Um, but there was a study done by a guy named James Fowler. He's a professor at UC San Diego. I referenced this in a talk I gave a couple years ago. Yeah, it's been a couple of years now. Um, he took data from the Framingham Heart Study, which is up in our
Yeah.
direction from me in Mass. It dates back to 1949. It was a longitudinal study, 5,000 people, and I actually don't know much about the cardiac side of what the data were that they collected, but what what Fowler did is he took using current data analysis tools. He took that body of data and looked at it differently. Turns out, not only, no doubt, they collected data on cardiac events, but they also collected a tremendous amount of demographic information and network information. So, of the 5,000 people, they knew not only who you were, who your family members were, but they could figure out who your neighbors were, who you went to church with, who you socialized with, on and on and on and on. And Dr. Fowler and his team were able to network map that out. And they discovered certain behaviors. I shouldn't say for certain behaviors, really, the behaviors that they could track impacted not just 1 degree around you, but 3 degrees around you.
Yeah.
So if you smoke or you're unhappy or you're depressed, not only are you more likely to have your kid be depressed, but so is your kid's best friend's mom.
Mhm.
So playing a little loose with the math, if you have 10 close contacts, then on order of 1,000 people get impacted by your behavior. Now, what I believe is, and I could tell you more stories of employee impact, when we teach mindfulness techniques that help people manage life, make better decisions, more frequently engage their executive function, um, and as I said, lowers the temperature in the factory, but people using the same techniques will lower their temperature at home
Sure.
in
Yeah.
in that conflict. What we believe is, what I believe is, in these small towns, if you're a manufacturer in these small towns, you may be the one or one of a couple employers that have a huge impact on the lives of the people in your community because they all have this shared experience. Well, if you make that shared experience different, higher quality, leading to better decisions, leading to better outcomes and behaviors, then you're for our employee base, right, which may be, in our case, we employ 400 plus people. We're now impacting, up to 1,000 people subject to overlap, 1,000 people for each one of those employees. And I think that's a fantastic. I said earlier, to whom much is given, much is expected. Our ability to, and I would be very excited to see other manufacturers adopt this as well. Our ability to help subtly shape the behaviors of our people in these communities, I think, can have a fantastic outcome, for the much greater society benefit.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. As you were talking, I was thinking about drops in a pond and the ripples that
Mhm.
spread out beyond that. And if you choose correctly and you manage it properly, the effects that you can have through an entire society could be tremendous. Definitely at the local level, but even beyond that. And
Mhm.
so this actually is a great segue to the last question. I'm going to join two different questions just for the sake of time. One was I kind of alluded to it in the beginning. How'd you get into this field?
Mm.
It seems like an interesting field for sure, but it doesn't necessarily track with your background, technically engineering and then business. And then in addition to that, if you could fast forward into the future, way past, the effects that you're doing right now, but at a point where you could look back in your career and reflect on everything that you've achieved and the full impact that you were capable of, what changes to the industry, to the company Alene, or in the communities that you touch would give you the deepest sense of fulfillment?
Mhm. Well, thank you. So how I got into this, almost by accident. And my career, if I did have a resume, it would look a little more like a random walk between, I actually started off in the pharmaceutical industry as a process engineer, and then I went to MBA school and did a tech startup, which taught me small operations. And managing an adventure environment, if you will. And then did some other technical work and found myself in candles. But each one of those things really does apply, right? From the science and engineering early on, which has how myself with a tech team, we've been able to, I can speak that language.
Mhm.
Obviously, the business education has been helpful, but also managing small environment. And how do you think about risk? Taking the software business and how we scale with candles here. So, like I say, it was a happy coincidence. My partner and I did a fundless sponsor search. We looked at thousands of opportunities, asked for 180 books, talked with 50 intermediaries, had calls with about 20 sellers, wrote 8 letters of intent. Two of them were really businesses we really wanted, and closed on one candle business in southern New Hampshire. So that's how we got into it, and it was a good fit for my partner who had worked on the sales or the channel side of supplying retail for most of his career.
Mm.
And so he knows everybody in the gift and home industry, which fits perfectly. And to me, it's a widget, right? And it happens to be a feel good widget, right? It
Mhm.
wouldn't be as much fun if we were making carburetors or, some other product opportunities. But the looking back legacy or the impact, some of the impact I think we've already had. I talked a lot about safety, right? And that was work we did, safety and consistency and quality. That's work we did really born out of a problem, right? It was a really painful problem. We had candles that were being returned and we were, paying money to buy those back.
Mm.
And we didn't understand why they weren't working. And we discovered, that bean story, right? There are different takes on that. Um, but I think also this comment about impacting communities and employee lives, and I'd offer an anecdote about um, a couple powerful anecdotes that we've seen internally, but one to share here about the role of manufacturing in the United States and the impact it can have. We have an employee in New Hampshire who told me a story of his background. He remembers being in first grade, being at court, and standing next to his mother and father in court, and the judge saying to his father, and I'll see if I can get through the story without choking up.
Yeah.
Um, Judge said to his father, "Sir, you're going to need to decide between um, being a parent and heroin." And the father said, "Well," he looked down at his son and said, "Well, if it's a matter of being a parent to this one, then I choose heroin."
Wow.
So that individual, later on, he was in a junior high, and he remembers being driven to baseball practice by his then stepfather, and he would or to a game, and he'd be picked up from the game, and he might have had uh, you might have had 4 at bats, 3 of them were base hits, multiple base hits. And he had if he had a strikeout on the 4th, and his stepfather would only want to talk about the strikeout.
Mhm.
He was a wrestler in high school and had in his weight class was hitting, in fact, 3 years in a row, he said he came in 2nd in state.
Wow.
And you can imagine what was said over the dinner table after that 3rd, 2nd place finish. And his stepfather said, "Well, gosh, it sure would have been great if one of these years you could come in first."
Mm.
So that is teen and found himself sleeping in high school dugouts in the summer and breaking into houses in the garages in the winter to keep warm. And eventually he fell in with a tough crowd, started dealing drugs, right? He's a pretty industrious kid. Um, and the drug dealers would give him drugs. He'd go away for the day or whatever, come back with cash. And they'd say,
Mhm.
"Oh, good job." It turns out the drug dealers were the first people in authority, the first individuals, the first adults in authority that looked him in the eye and said, "Good job."
No kidding. Wow.
And so you think about that. This really informed the work we did and we've done internally because every employee deserves to be seen
Mhm.
and heard and listened to, and valued. And if we do nothing else as management in this little candle company, but to teach our supervisors and our managers to look people in the eye and treat them with respect and have them be seen, if we do nothing else than that, we will have had a tremendous impact. Because indeed, some of our people, this may be the only job they hold, but it it was a job that is now not only giving them a career, but it's where they do feel like they have a place and they were being seen. And so I offer this up because manufacturing in the United States is in a unique situation, right? We're, gosh, I don't know the number now, 9%, 14%, whatever the workforce. Um, uh, a bit important part of the economy, but that 9 or 14% that we touch is, these aren't Google employees, right? These are people who um, may have been on a very different path.
Mhm.
And for us to give these people a chance and treat them with respect, not only is that human, but it is a benefit for everyone. As I said in the Fowler story, you know, us giving this young man an opportunity. He's now been with us probably 18 years now.
Wow.
And he's, moved up and he has positions and he's making a fine wage. But there are other versions of the story that don't turn out that way. And I think we're in a position to help shape many of those stories.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Definitely like a human story behind this, and in many ways, giving people a second chance at life, that society hasn't been able to do. And you guys are doing so in a very localized way. With all this, Rod, it's been extraordinary. I know we're past our time, so I apologize for that, but it's been great getting to know you, your field better. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that we can have this conversation again in the future over a drink and maybe some
Uh,
candles.
I would love that, Nick. Thank you so much. It's been a complete pleasure.
Uh,
That was Rodney Harl, and now, Unnatural Signals.
The following were key takeaways from my conversation with Rodney. Number one, industries never die, they're repositioned. Candles went from essential infrastructure to luxury lifestyle product. When your core use disappears, move up the value chain into emotion, identity, or experience. Number two, disruption creates opportunity for specialists. Instead of building a consumer brand, Alene became the expert manufacturer powering many brands. Winning doesn't always mean owning the spotlight. Number three, safety and trust can be a strategic moat. Tens of millions of candles, every one is intended to be set on fire in someone's house. In high-risk products, reliability becomes a competitive advantage. And number four, old industries still reward modern strategy. Even a 350-year decline industry can grow 10x with the right positioning, partnerships, and operational excellence. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Unnatural Selection. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone shaping the future. Explore more at unnaturalselection.net and connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, keep evolving.